I arrived at the venue just before dusk, the sky painted in soft streaks of orange and violet over the Hudson River. It was one of those luxury barn-style estates that pretended to be rustic but screamed money in every corner. Crystal chandeliers hanging from wooden beams, valet parking, champagne handed to you before you even got past the first rose-adorned archway. I wasn't just a guest. I was one of the primary sponsors. My company's name was on the back of the program in small, elegant print beneath the florists and the caterers, which I didn't mind. I wasn't doing it for visibility. I was doing it for Josh. We met in college, freshman dorms, same floor, same early morning business classes. We were opposites. I was sharp edges and sleepless ambition. He was laid-back genius and warmth. Over time, we became brothers, not by blood, but by every meaningful measure. So when Josh got engaged to Madeline, I offered to help without hesitation. I knew wedding budgets could be suffocating, and I had the means to make it easier. It wasn't even a question. So when I arrived that day, I expected warmth, familiarity. I expected Josh to find me quickly, pull me into a hug, and say something like, "Man, I'm so glad you're here." Instead, I was handed a gold-rimmed name card by a harried coordinator who didn't even look me in the eye. Table 19, that was the first red flag. The numbers went up to 20, and I saw right away that table 19 was tucked in the far corner, almost touching the swinging doors to the kitchen, the kind of place where waiters shout orders to one another and where trays of empty glasses are stacked with little care for sound. At first, I thought there'd been a mistake, surely. I looked around for someone I recognized, maybe a college friend, a mutual connection, but everyone at table 19 was a stranger to me. A woman from Madeline's yoga studio, a couple who worked with her father, and someone who didn't even speak English. I sat, and I waited, and waited. I told myself not to make a scene, that Josh would notice and fix it. But the reception started. He made his grand entrance. He didn't look toward the back of the room. I laughed to myself, bitterly, silently. A voice in my head whispered that I was overreacting. Maybe this was logistics, not personal. But then, the toasts began. The best man, the maid of honor, even the officiant spoke about the people who made the day possible. They named family, close friends, people who helped financially. My name was never mentioned. Even worse, when I stood up mid-speech to stretch my legs, a waiter bumped into me with a tray of dirty dishes, muttered a half-hearted apology, and kept walking. I wasn't just by the kitchen. I was in its shadow. After dinner, people mingled. I wandered, hoping to find Josh, but he was always surrounded. Madeline's family, former co-workers, his college roommate from junior year. I caught his eye once. He smiled. That was it. No wave, no come over, no thanks. That's when the humiliation began to calcify into something else. It wasn't about the table anymore. It wasn't about speeches. It was the accumulation of oversight. The erasure of my presence. The feeling that I wasn't part of this new version of his life. And the sharpest cut of all was that I hadn't expected it. I'd walked in thinking I was family. I'd left wondering if I was ever more than a convenience. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat in the silence, still in my suit, the boutonniere wilting on my lapel. I pulled out the program again, stared at the list of contributors. My name was there, but it felt meaningless. It was around midnight when I opened my laptop and began typing. Not a message, not a confrontation, just a spreadsheet, a list of everything I'd invested in Josh's startup, every consulting hour I'd offered for free, every connection I'd brokered. Every cent my company had poured into his. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was clear. For the first time in a long time, I saw our dynamic without the haze of nostalgia, and the view from table 19, it was lonely. Before I closed my laptop, I wrote one line in bold at the top of the spreadsheet. Remember who helped build the house you got married in. The next morning, I woke up groggy, not from alcohol, I'd barely touched my glass, but from something heavier. Humiliation has a way of lingering in your body. It stiffens your shoulders, knots your stomach. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at my shoes, wondering if I'd blown everything out of proportion. Maybe there'd been a mix-up. Maybe Josh had meant to seat me elsewhere. Maybe I was just being sensitive. But then I remembered the way he smiled across the room. Not an apologetic glance, just distant politeness. Like I was one of 100 guests, not the person who wired him $150,000 when his prototype short-circuited 3 weeks before a pitch meeting. At breakfast, I sat alone at the hotel's overpriced buffet, picking at cold eggs. Around me, guests laughed and scrolled through photos of the wedding night. I overheard someone say, "That app guy, what's his name? He's so lucky to have investors like that." I didn't even flinch. My fork scraped the plate. It wasn't about money. If it were, I wouldn't have given him that first loan in a handwritten envelope, long before he had a pitch deck or a business plan. I invested in Josh because I believed in him, and more than that, because I loved him like a brother. But brothers don't forget each other in rooms that matter. I went back to my room, packed in silence, and checked out without leaving a note. I didn't text Josh. I didn't call. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound bitter, or worse, desperate for acknowledgement? As I sat in the back of the Uber to Grand Central, watching trees blur into buildings, I thought back to the first time Josh and I talked about his company. It was over cheap ramen in my apartment, the kind of meal you eat with your coat still on. He was frustrated with how disconnected therapists and patients were in digital spaces. "Everyone's talking about AI and automation," he said. But no one's asking how a person feels when a chatbot tells them they're depressed. I believed in that fire. I believed in his idea, so I helped. I built pitch decks, coached him before investor meetings, connected him with my old mentor from Bain. I offered space in my WeWork office before he had his own. I never asked for equity early on. I just wanted him to succeed. That's why the wedding hurt. Not just because of the table, but because that moment, his big day, was supposed to be a full-circle celebration, a silent acknowledgement that we'd made it together. And instead, I'd been erased. Back in Manhattan, I dropped my bag at home and walked to the office. Sunday afternoon, quiet. The cleaning crew nodded at me as I entered. I sat in the glass conference room, pulled out my laptop again and reopened the spreadsheet. I started a new tab, titled it Reclaim. I wasn't sure what that meant yet. I wasn't planning revenge, but I needed to reclaim something, my dignity, my time, maybe my sense of boundaries. I had given so much without questioning where it placed me. I assumed proximity meant permanence. Around 6 p.m., I got a text from my COO. "Just a heads up, Josh's team submitted some new funding documents for Q3. Want me to approve?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the message. I'd always signed off without looking too deeply. I trusted Josh. But now something in me had shifted. Before replying, I opened the documents myself. They were standard, nothing shady. But I noticed something odd. In the attached marketing slide under Partners and Strategic Supporters, my company wasn't listed. I read it twice. We weren't on the deck. I wasn't on the deck. Suddenly, a slow, cold understanding settled in. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't about a table. Somewhere along the way, I'd been edited out. Later that night, lying on my couch with the lights off, I stared at the ceiling, my phone resting on my chest. I didn't feel anger, not like fire. It was more like frost. A slow freeze of realization spreading through me. He had already moved on. Strategically, quietly. Maybe someone told him it was better to distance from early investors. Maybe he thought I was too close, too emotional. That's when it began to crystallize. Not a plan, not yet, but a possibility. What happens when the person who helped build the machine decides to stop keeping it running? I didn't make any decisions right away. That Monday, I went to work as usual, smiled in meetings, signed off on internal memos, but beneath the surface something had shifted. I wasn't angry in the way people imagine, red-faced, impulsive, storming into rooms. It was quieter than that. A steady hum of clarity that sat behind my ribs. That week, I started paying attention in a different way. I began pulling every thread that connected me to Josh's startup. Some were thick ropes, funding lines, shared contracts. Others were thinner, introductions I'd made, contacts I'd nurtured, influence I'd loaned him by association. And the more I traced them, the more I saw how much I'd poured in without guarding the shape of what came back. Every time I found another email, another forwarded deck, another event I'd helped him prepare for, I remembered a specific moment. Like the night we stayed up in his dorm working on his first business model canvas, fueled by vending machine coffee and ambition, or the time he called me in a panic because a seed investor was threatening to back out, and I spent 6 hours rewriting his financial projections from scratch. I wasn't doing it for thanks. That's not who I am. But I think some part of me believed that effort, true effort, created unbreakable bonds. Turns out some people are very comfortable breaking what they didn't build. By Friday, I had a document 30 pages long, not just financial contributions, but emotional ones. Personal sacrifices, the time I flew back early from vacation to help him with a demo that glitched 5 minutes before a VC meeting. The time I vouched for his character to a skeptical partner who thought Josh was too idealistic to be trusted with scale. I stared at that document for a long time, not as evidence, not as leverage, as truth. I think we tell ourselves stories to justify our giving, that it will be returned, that loyalty is reciprocal, but some people take your story and rewrite it without you. I wasn't on that wedding table because I didn't belong in the new chapter. I wasn't on the startup's pitch deck because I didn't fit the new narrative. Josh was creating a clean image for investors, fresh talent, innovation, future-facing. He was erasing the scaffolding to reveal the shiny exterior, and I, by being too close, too foundational, was part of what he wanted to forget. That weekend, I went to my parents' house in Connecticut. I hadn't been in months. They didn't ask why I suddenly showed up. They just welcomed me in. My mom made tea, and my dad talked about his garden. It was quiet, grounding. Saturday night, I walked into the attic and opened an old box of college stuff. I found a photo from senior year. Josh and I on the steps of our building, arms thrown around each other, eyes lit up from whatever dumb victory we'd just pulled off. Back then, we were scrappy and hopeful. Back then, loyalty was a given, but I'd grown up, and I realized, standing there with that photo in my hand, that maybe Josh never had. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Sunday morning, I woke up early, sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wrote a short email to my COO, hold all pending disbursements to Everwell until further notice. I'll explain Monday. No drama, no anger, just pause. Because I needed time, not just to understand what I was feeling, but to decide what came next. I went back to the city with a calm I hadn't felt in years. At work, I moved through the halls like a ghost, observing everything with new eyes. I saw how often I'd stepped in for people, shielded them, filled gaps no one asked me to. Josh wasn't the only one who'd benefited from my silence and generosity. I'd trained people to expect I'd never demand recognition. That was going to change. By Wednesday, my legal team had a preliminary review ready. Standard protocol, non-binding funding terms, discretionary renewals, exit clauses. Clean. Simple. Within my rights. I hadn't decided to pull anything yet, but I was giving myself permission to. And somewhere deep inside, I knew. I wasn't the villain here. I was just done playing the fool. The following Monday, I sat in my corner office with a view of the skyline and opened every file I had on Everwell. Contracts, board minutes, quarterly performance reviews. I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was looking for patterns, signals I'd missed before, anything that might tell me when exactly I stopped being seen as a partner and started being treated like a liability. My assistant knocked once before stepping in. Josh emailed again, wants to confirm a lunch for next week. I stared at her. Did we schedule that? She shook her head. No, he's just following up. I nodded. Tell him I'm booked indefinitely. She left, and I turned back to the screen. The deeper I dug, the more I saw it. Subtle moves that now, in hindsight, formed a strategy. Josh had been easing me out for months. New advisors brought in, fewer shared updates, meeting invites suddenly slipping through the cracks. At the time, I'd chalked it up to his workload, the pressure of scaling. But now it looked intentional. He wasn't just building his company, he was rewriting its origin story. Midweek, I asked my in-house counsel to review Everwell's funding structure. "I just want to understand how clean the cut would be if we pulled discretionary support," I said, tone even. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go there?" "I'm not going anywhere yet. I'm just checking the terrain." She returned 2 days later with a thin folder and a raised eyebrow. "You structured this well," she said. "Disbursements are quarterly, renewals at your sole discretion, no obligations beyond advisory presence. If you want to stop the flow, you can." I thanked her and took the folder home. That night I sat on my balcony, city lights blinking around me, and flipped through it. Legally, it was straightforward. Ethically, it depended on who was telling the story. If you asked Josh, I was probably still the big brother with deep pockets, the fallback plan, the guy who'd always be there because he always had been. But I wasn't his safety net anymore. I wasn't his secret weapon. I wasn't even in his life, at least not the one he was carefully curating now. Thursday morning, I got another ping, an internal notification from our PR analytics platform. One of our newer partner accounts had quietly removed our company logo from their homepage. Curious, I dug deeper. The startup was funded by the same VC group Josh had recently joined forces with. Coincidence? Maybe. But I knew better than to believe in those. I requested access to our internal notes from the last Everwell board call. Our associate had logged everything. One section jumped out at me. Discussion raised about perceived over-reliance on early individual sponsors, recommendation to restructure cap table narratives ahead of Series B. That sentence landed like a punch. Not only had Josh been strategizing how to phase me out, he'd discussed it openly with others, like I was a branding problem, an image to be polished off his resume. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I opened another tab and began writing. Not to Josh, not to anyone. Just a journal entry, really. I wrote about loyalty, about how sometimes people confuse access with entitlement, about how gratitude evaporates the moment visibility increases. And then I wrote one sentence in bold. They didn't just forget me. They rebranded me out. Friday evening, I left the office late. The building was quiet. The halls felt cavernous, like echoes of an earlier version of myself still moved through them. I thought about all the years I'd spent helping people build dreams that weren't mine. How often I'd poured fuel into engines just to watch them drive off without me. On the subway ride home, I listened to a podcast on founder psychology. A guest speaker said something that stuck with me. We're taught to believe that early supporters are sentimental artifacts, but they're not. They're the foundation. You remove them, you compromise the structure. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let that sink in. I wasn't sentimental. I was structural. And Josh had forgotten that. That weekend, I cancelled all my usual plans. No dinners, no social events. I spent 2 days combing through Everwell's dependencies, not just financial, but strategic. Vendor relationships, partner alliances, press pipelines, the subtle yet powerful touchpoints my team had fostered. They weren't easily visible, but they were very real. And I was beginning to understand something important. I didn't need to burn the house down. I just needed to stop holding up the beams. Monday morning, I walked into my office 30 minutes before anyone else. I turned off my phone, shut the blinds, and sat in silence for a few minutes before opening my laptop. There was no anger in my chest, no rush of adrenaline, just certainty. I started with an email to our finance department. Effective immediately, pause all financial disbursements to Everwell pending internal strategic review. Flag this account as under audit. Then one to our legal team. Begin preparing the formal notice of discretionary withdrawal per Clause 7B of our agreement. Notify me before sending. It wasn't a nuclear option. It was measured, lawful, quiet, but its effect would be seismic. Without our next funding round, Everwell wouldn't hit its Q3 goals. That would ripple into investor confidence, partnerships, staffing forecasts. This wasn't about revenge. This was a reset. The same afternoon, I asked my assistant to pull a list of every client we'd referred to Everwell in the past 18 months. I read through each name carefully. Partners I respected. Brands I'd gone out on a limb to bring in. One by one, I started making calls. Casual, polite, nothing inflammatory. Hey, just an internal heads up. We're re-evaluating our alignment with Everwell. I'd recommend holding off on any new integrations until we complete due diligence. I'll keep you posted. Most thanked me. One said, "Funny you mention that. Their last update was a little off. It felt less like sabotage and more like cleanup, like removing my fingerprints from a painting someone no longer credited me for." The next day, I reviewed our internal communications guide and updated the language around our affiliations. In the Strategic Partners section, Everwell was removed, not with bitterness, just with precision. Later that night, I received an email from Josh. Subject: "You okay? Hey, I noticed we missed our disbursement this week. Let me know if there's something I should be aware of. Happy to jump on a call." I read it twice. It wasn't angry or demanding, just uncertain, like a man hearing a creak in the house he thought was solid. I didn't reply, because I didn't owe him clarity before I owed myself peace. That evening, as I walked home, I remembered something he said to me a few years ago. We were standing outside a coffee shop after one of his investor meetings. He was still high on adrenaline, eyes bright with ambition. "I just want to build something that outlives me," he said. I smiled then. "You will. But what I should have said was, be careful who helps you build it. They might also know how to bring it down." The next few days were filled with movement. My COO aligned our transition strategy. Communications was prepped. Legal had the withdrawal letter ready. I sat with it for hours, reading each sentence carefully. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse. It simply invoked the clause we'd both agreed to from the start, a safety valve. And now I was turning it. Before signing, I paused. I opened my old emails, one from 2 years ago, right after Josh had landed his first big pitch. He'd written, "None of this would be happening without you. I hope you know that. When this company makes it, it'll be because you believed in it before anyone else did." I closed it. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer meant anything. The next morning, I signed the document, sent, and just like that, the current stopped flowing. That afternoon, I got another message from Josh, shorter this time. Subject: "Wait, can we talk? This feels sudden. Can we please just talk?" Still, I said nothing. I wasn't doing this to provoke a reaction. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't even certain he understood what he'd done. And maybe that was the saddest part. He hadn't needed to stab me in the back. He just needed to forget me long enough for it to feel like one. I wasn't going to yell or beg or explain. I was simply going to disappear, along with every ounce of support that had built the floor beneath his feet. Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can say. The first ripple came fast. Less than 48 hours after we issued the formal withdrawal, I started getting messages from contacts in our extended network. Nothing dramatic at first, just curiosity. "Hey, just heard about the pause with Everwell. Anything we should know? We've got a campaign scheduled with them next month. Are we moving forward?" Some of these questions came from people who'd never even known my history with Josh. But it didn't matter. In tech and finance, perception isn't just part of the game, it is the game. And when one key sponsor pulls back, others start asking what they missed. By the end of that week, 2 major referral partners had quietly stepped away. A client Josh had been negotiating a multi-platform integration with sent an email stating they were reallocating resources. A startup incubator removed Everwell from its featured alumni section. The machine had started to stall. I watched it happen like someone watching dominoes fall, not with malice, but with detachment. I wasn't interfering. I wasn't calling in favors. I was simply no longer protecting what didn't protect me. I received no more emails from Josh for a while. No calls, no texts, just silence. I imagined him scrambling behind the scenes, reassuring the board, promising the delay was temporary, blaming operational hiccups. He'd always been a good talker, but money has its own language. By the end of the month, my legal team forwarded a summary of Everwell's Q3 investor performance report. "Not great," the email read. Flatline growth, 2 major deals dropped, cash runway shortened by 4 months. I stared at the PDF without opening it, not out of guilt, but because I didn't need validation. The numbers just confirmed what I already knew. Systems built on borrowed faith collapse fast when the lender steps back. Late one night, I walked through Midtown alone, headphones in, hands deep in my coat pockets. The streets buzzed with energy, but my mind was elsewhere. I found myself thinking back to junior year when Josh and I almost got kicked out of school. He'd taken the fall for a group project that another student had plagiarized, and the administration wasn't buying our version. I marched into the dean's office with a binder of time-stamped emails and a voice shaking with rage. I defended him like I would have defended family. That memory played in my head like a scene from someone else's life, a loyalty so pure it almost embarrassed me now. But that version of Josh, the one who couldn't believe someone would go that far for him, felt long gone. He'd become someone who calculated value in real time, who shifted loyalty based on optics, who put me at table 19. The irony wasn't lost on me. One evening, my COO walked into my office holding a folder. "You might want to see this," she said. Inside was a printout of a job board post. Everwell was quietly hiring a new CFO. Their old one had been with them since day one. A friend of mine, in fact. Jumping ship, I asked. She nodded. Or being pushed. Either way, the walls were shaking. In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance. People talked, whispered. The press hadn't picked anything up yet, but in closed circles the narrative was forming. "Looks like Everwell's hitting a wall." "Thought they were solid. What happened?" I said nothing, made no comment, let the silence do its work. Then one morning a text from Josh. "You there? Please." "I'm not asking for anything, I just want to talk. One conversation, that's all." I read it and locked my phone because here's the truth. I didn't need that conversation. There was nothing he could say that would unseat the silence of that wedding. The speeches I wasn't included in. The months he spent rewriting history while standing on a foundation I'd helped lay. This wasn't spite. It was space. Space between who we were and who we'd become. Space between the man I defended in college and the one who edited me out of his future. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't returning. And the longer he sat in the fallout, the clearer that would become. The confrontation didn't happen in a boardroom or over the phone. It happened on a random Tuesday, unannounced. I was in my office reviewing Q4 projections when my assistant buzzed in. "Josh is here, he didn't call ahead." I looked up slowly. "Did he say why?" She hesitated. "No, but he looks serious." I exhaled and said, "Let him in." He walked through the door like someone carrying a weight he hadn't fully decided whether to drop or defend. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't sit down right away. "I'm not here to argue," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "That's good, I'm not in the mood." He finally sat, resting his hands on the edge of the table like he was holding onto it for balance. "You could have called," I said. "I tried," he replied. "You didn't answer." I didn't respond. Silence felt more honest than anything else I could say. He looked around the room like it might remind him who I was. "I know things have been complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, amused. "That's one word for it." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed, short and bitter. "You mean the slow erasure or the strategic distancing?" His mouth tightened. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain to me what it was like," I said. "Help me understand how I went from co-architect to invisible, from partner to liability." He looked like he wanted to say something profound, but all that came out was, "I didn't know how to manage the perception." That hit harder than if he'd shouted. "Perception," I repeated. "So you made a choice. Not to talk to me, not to explain. Just shift me out." "Because I didn't fit the new look?" "It's not that simple." "It never is," I said. "But tell me this. Did you forget who vouched for you when no one else would? Who got you that first meeting with Eden Tech? Who covered your salary from my own company's buffer when payroll failed that winter?" His face twisted. "I never forgot." "But you edited," I said, voice steady. "You rewrote. And somewhere in that new version I was just the guy you sat by the kitchen." He winced. "That was the planner's mistake. I didn't see the chart till that morning. I wanted to change it. Madeline said it was too late. Too late, I echoed, to honor someone who funded the venue. He dropped his eyes. I stood up, walked to the window. The skyline stretched ahead of me, vast and uncaring. You know, I said, I didn't stop funding you out of spite. I stopped because I realized I was holding up something that no longer recognized the shape of my hands. He stayed quiet. I turned back. You want to know what hurts most? It's not the money. It's not even the betrayal. It's realizing that I spent years believing I mattered in your story, and then watching you write me out like a footnote. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I get it, I said. You're growing. You're chasing scale. Image matters. Maybe I didn't fit the new narrative. Maybe loyalty isn't impressive enough for Series B investors. That's not fair, he said finally. You don't understand the pressure. Then help me understand, I said, folding my arms, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you got everything you ever asked for, and then turned your back on the one person who gave it to you without condition. His voice broke a little. I was scared. You were always the one who had it together. I thought if I tried to do things on my own, maybe I'd finally feel like it was mine. And did you? He didn't answer. We stood in silence for a long time. Eventually, I said, I'm not going to undo what's done. The funding's gone. The referrals are retracted. You'll have to rebuild. Maybe that's what you wanted all along. He looked at me, pain flickering behind his exhaustion. Do you hate me? No, I said, but I don't trust you anymore, and I don't know if I ever will again. He nodded once, slowly, like someone accepting a sentence they knew they deserved. And then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in months the room felt like mine again. A few weeks after Josh left my office, the headlines started circling. They weren't explosive. Just quiet murmurs, then questions in tech newsletters. Everwell restructures amid leadership changes. Q3 decline prompts board reassessment. Words like realignment, capital compression, growth stall. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing in it that brought pleasure. Watching something fall apart that you once helped build isn't satisfying. It's hollow. I still remember the day the first article dropped. I was at a gala in the Upper East Side, a fundraiser for mental health startups, exactly the kind of room where Everwell used to be praised. A few people came up to me, some asking with genuine curiosity, others with quiet calculation. So, is it true what they're saying? I just smiled, sipped my drink and said, I'm not affiliated anymore. And I wasn't. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that still tied my name to what it had become. At some point during the evening, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The city glittered below as if mocking the idea of permanence. Things come and go here. Companies rise and crash. Names are remembered and forgotten with equal ease. And standing in the cold air, I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grieving. Not just the friendship, not just the betrayal, but the version of myself who'd believed that loyalty was a shield. That being good to people guaranteed you a place in their future. That's the thing no one talks about. How grief lingers even after you've done what's right, even after you've taken back control. On the ride home, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Years of startup expos, dinner parties, blurry nights after pitch wins. Josh's face smiling in frame after frame. Back then, I thought we were unstoppable. I tapped on a video, him giving his first product demo. His voice cracking, hands shaking, but eyes lit up. You could see he believed in what he was saying. I paused it halfway through. That version of him wasn't gone, but somewhere along the way, it had been traded for performance. Maybe it was the pressure, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just who he always was beneath the charm. Still, it hurt. I spent the weekend upstate at a place I hadn't visited in years, a little cottage I'd bought before I made my first million, back when I thought success would feel like freedom. It was quiet there, no signal, just trees, water, and time. I walked the trail behind the house, following the old path we used to take when a group of us, Josh included, came here one summer to strategize and mostly just drink and laugh. I remembered him doing cannonballs off the dock, remembered us cooking burnt burgers and calling it gourmet, and I missed it. Not what it had become, but what it used to be. The version of friendship where there were no decks, no optics, no politics, just belief, just care. I sat on the porch that night and wrote a letter, not to send, just to get it out. Josh, I don't know if you remember the first time you told me about your idea. You said, what if therapy felt like a conversation, not a transaction? I believed in that. I believed in you. But somewhere you stopped talking to me like I was part of the conversation, and I didn't notice until it was too late. You didn't break my heart. You just made me realize it had a limit. I folded the paper and left it on the table beside me. Not everything needed to be delivered to matter. By Sunday night I felt lighter, like something had finally shifted. I didn't forgive him. Not fully. But I accepted that I wasn't going to get closure from him. I would have to build it myself. Back in the city, things moved on. Everwell was no longer a subject of gossip. Something new had taken its place. That's how it works here. No downfall is ever the last. But me, I moved differently. Slower, smarter, more cautious with my yes. Not because I didn't believe in people anymore, but because now I knew some stories require more than loyalty to stay in the room. Weeks passed. Life returned to its rhythm, but something in me remained unsettled. I'd made my decisions. I'd drawn my lines. The silence held, but a part of me still lingered in the wreckage, not looking back to regret, just searching for understanding. One Friday, I left the city without telling anyone. No plans, no destination. I just drove north until the traffic thinned and the buildings gave way to space. Hours later, I found myself outside a beach house I hadn't visited in years. It was the kind of place you forget you still own until you see your name on the mailbox. I parked and sat there for a while, staring at the weather-worn porch. The house wasn't fancy, just quiet, honest. The kind of place where things didn't need to impress anyone. Inside, the air smelled of dust and sea salt. I opened the windows, made coffee, and sat down with nothing but the sound of the ocean bleeding through the screens. That night, I walked along the shore with my shoes in my hand, the water cold against my feet. I thought about all the versions of me that had walked these sands. 25, ambitious and broke. 32, flush with my first big exit. 35, lonely and unsure if success had meant anything real. I sat in the sand and let the waves creep toward my legs, and I asked myself something I hadn't dared before. What would I have done differently, not to change the outcome, but to see the story more clearly while I was still inside it? Maybe I wouldn't have given so freely. Maybe I'd have made space to ask what I was getting back, not in dollars, but in honesty. Maybe I'd have noticed when Josh stopped inviting me to meetings, when our calls got shorter, when gratitude shifted into assumption. But maybe not. Maybe the reason it stung so much is because I was never pretending, and he was. Back at the house, I opened my laptop and found the letter I'd written to Josh weeks earlier. I reread it in silence. Then, for the first time, I clicked print. I folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. Not to send, just to give it form. Let it live somewhere other than my chest. Then I lit a small fire in the outdoor pit and watched the letter burn. It wasn't symbolic, it was practical. Some things need to be said, but they don't need to be heard. The next morning, I cooked eggs and toast and ate slowly, watching the tide roll in. I thought about the word closure, how people chase it like a destination. But closure isn't a door someone else opens for you. It's the moment you stop standing at one that's already closed. I didn't need Josh to say sorry. I didn't need him to fix what had unraveled. I just needed to accept that the person I defended, funded, believed in, he didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. Maybe I just filled in the blanks with hope. By noon, I packed my bag and locked up the house. As I drove back toward the city, I passed a diner we used to eat at on the way to investor meetings. We'd sit in a corner booth, splitting fries and pitching each other until the food was cold. I didn't stop this time. I just let the memory pass like a wave that didn't need to be caught. When I got home, I poured a drink and sat on my balcony. My phone buzzed once, an email from a startup I'd been advising casually, asking if I wanted to join their advisory board more formally. And just like that, a new door opened. But this time, I was different, more cautious, less eager to give without reciprocity, still generous but not blind. There's something sobering about being forgotten by someone you never thought would lose sight of you. But it also teaches you to remember yourself more fiercely. I wasn't ruined by what happened. I was refined, sharper, quieter, still capable of building, but finally willing to ask what I was building for, and with who. Months later, I was invited to another wedding, a smaller one. No sponsorships, no gala venue, just an intimate beach ceremony for a friend from grad school. I almost declined. Weddings had left a bitter taste. But something in the simplicity of the invite called to me. No plus ones, no table numbers, just, "We'd love to have you with us." When I arrived, the bride greeted me with a hug that said everything without words. She pulled me into the crowd, introduced me to everyone by name, and sat me in the middle of a long wooden table beneath lanterns, flanked by old friends and new ones. No one talked business. No one asked what I did. We passed wine and stories and bread like it was ritual. There was no corner table, no forgotten name card. There was just presence. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged again. Later that night, under a sky full of stars, someone asked about my work. I answered simply, what I built, what I walked away from, and what I was still learning. No bitterness, just honesty. A woman at the table said, "Sounds like you learned how to let go." I smiled. No. I just learned where to hold tighter, because it wasn't about the money or even the betrayal. It was about knowing the difference between being included and being valued. As I stood there watching the couple dance, arms wrapped around each other in a slow, imperfect rhythm, I thought about Josh. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he didn't. I didn't need to know. The finality of what happened between us wasn't a door slammed shut. It was a path that ended where it had to, and I'd kept walking. And in walking, I'd found something better than closure. I'd found clarity. I wasn't the same man who sat by the kitchen with a clenched jaw and a half-finished glass of champagne. I wasn't the man who ran spreadsheets at midnight searching for proof that I mattered. I was the man who knew his value before anyone else confirmed it. And that's the kind of man who doesn't need a spotlight or a mention in a speech to know he shaped the room. Sometimes we give people the best of us, and they return the bare minimum. Sometimes we show up at the foundation and get left off the plaque, but that doesn't mean we didn't build it. That doesn't mean our fingerprints aren't still in the concrete. When the night ended, I walked back to my car slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't scroll through my phone. I just breathed, and somewhere inside me, a quiet voice said, "You're free. Free from the story that was never really yours. Free to choose better next time. Free to build not for proximity, but for peace." And as I drove away, I didn't feel vengeful or triumphant. I just felt settled. It took being seated by the kitchen to realize I'd spent too long in rooms where I mistook access for intimacy, where I thought my presence was enough to guarantee permanence. But I know better now. I know where I stand, and I know I'll never sit at a table that makes me question it again. Sometimes being forgotten is the clearest reminder to remember yourself. So here's to the ones who saw you as a stepping stone. Here's to the ones who thought loyalty was disposable, and here's to you for learning to walk away before your silence turned into self-betrayal. If you've ever felt what I felt, misplaced, overlooked, quietly erased, subscribe to this channel. You're not alone. And you deserve better. And if you want to know what happened next, what I did when Josh reached out one last time, you'll want to watch the video suggested on your screen right now. Because some stories don't end with revenge, they end with rediscovery.